And in today's episode, I am joined by the lovely Scott Stewart, who is a motivational speaker, an author, and life coach dedicated to empowering individuals to overcome their past trauma and embrace a future filled with hope and purpose. After enduring an abusive childhood and facing unimaginable challenges, including the loss of loved ones, Scott has transformed his pain into power. His mission is to inspire others to recognize that their life's challenges do not define them, but rather shape their responses. Through his powerful story of resilience and forgiveness, Scott teaches that true healing comes from within, and he invites you all today to explore the profound question of what forgiveness really means. So, welcome to the Victim to Victor podcast show, Scott. It's so great to have you here.
Anu, thank you so much for having me. What a privilege. And I got to tell you, I love the brand of your podcast, Victim to Victor. How oh my gosh, how relevant is that in life, right?
Absolutely, because you are, you've come from being a victim to a victor yourself. And, it'd be great for you to actually share your story with us today.
Sure, of course, I'd love to.
Okay, perfect. So tell us a bit about yourself and what led you to become a motivational speaker and coach that you are today.
Yeah. So, we there's a to start off with, there's this old cliche, right? And it's called, our mess often can become our message. And that is me to 100%. And just from the maybe from the 200-foot level, I grew up in a home with a mom and a dad, and just in small town rural America. um, but I quickly learned that my father, um, he had issues. I'm not going to dive deep into that, but as we go through the story, you'll learn more about him. But he had issues. He had anger issues. I think he had a lot of other things going on. But I grew up in a house uh, based on fear, and that was fear of him. He could go from zero to extremely mad in seconds, and so I always walked on eggshells. And knowing that at any moment I could be accused of doing something wrong, or I didn't put something back, or I didn't do this, I didn't follow through with that. And so there was a lot of emotional trauma because I remember far more days growing up that my father would yell at me. Now, when I say yell, I'm not talking just raising your voice. I'm talking elevated with like fear, with like he's going to come uncorked. And so there was a lot of that as I grew up, and I remember far many more days of my father yelling profusely at me as opposed to not. The the other side of this unfortunate part was that my mom and I were close, but my mom was the world's best enabler. She always had an excuse for why he was like that. He didn't sleep well. He had a bad day at work. His shoulder was hurting, his neck. I mean, there was always a reason. And so I grew up in that kind of environment. And as you might imagine, that is not a good recipe to put to create a young person and put them out into the world. It didn't work. And so I was very ill equipped to come into adulthood, to be a productive citizen, to be a good to be a good husband, to be a good father, to be a good employee. I mean, all of those things were just really far, they missed the mark. And so that gives you a little bit of a background of what started, I think, preparing me for this season of life, because I understand a lot of those things of what that is to grow up in a very not even dysfunctional, but toxic home life. And to top all of that off, just real quick, back in the, I'm going to show how old I am now, but back in the the late 70s to the early 80s, especially in small town America, there was not the awareness to this thing called ADHD. Um, Now, maybe some of the bigger cities had caught on to it at that point, but not the smaller parts of America. And I clearly, clearly had those kinds of struggles and challenges with ADHD. I just could not remember stuff. I couldn't retain information. I'd be reading a book and 30 seconds later, my head is going off thinking about something else, but I'm still reading the book. And for folks that have that and struggle with that, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Well, my dad's answer to not being able to learn and retain information was, well, we'll just ground him. We'll take things away that matter to him, and we'll just force him to stay in his room and study harder. And uh, we clearly know today that doesn't work. That's not the answer. And so it really kind of magnified the problem, I guess, if you will. So that gives you a little bit of history of me as growing up and getting ready to move into adulthood.
Oh, amazing. Thank you so much for sharing that. And yeah, I can really understand, how that would have, really impacted you as a young age because I just feel like back in those days, I mean, I'm an 80s girl, but back in those days, it was all about controlled parenting. It was all about, being grounded and we were raised in fear. I felt like so many of us were scared of our parents. I feel like that's not the case anymore. Parenting has evolved, doesn't it?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and the other, yeah, correct. You are 100% correct. And here's the crazy thing. My mom and dad and we all said I love yous. It's not like there was no love, but there was a very, very unhealthy understanding of what love is, right? And my mom and I often hugged her and I kissed her, but I was never given a really accurate and healthy role models of what good parenting is.
Mm.
And so, and to be fair, I don't make any excuse for him, but to be fair, my dad's dad, he was a lot the same way, and I learned this later on in life. But and then his father was even more so. So the history, what do we call that? The history repeats itself, and as unfortunate as that is, I think the positive thing in this is that, and I don't say this with arrogance. I just say this with love and healing. Is I was the guy that broke the cycle.
Mm, okay.
My children will never know. My grandchildren, my great grandchildren, will never know what that was like. And that moves us into the story a little bit more. But yeah.
Mm.
Anyway, yeah, definitely different times back then for sure. Parenting.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it was. Yeah, yeah, yeah. You're right, and I feel like so many of us, like we're the light workers now, and we're becoming so much more attuned with our behaviors, and yeah, we're breaking those cycles, like in
Right.
intergenerational trauma. I just feel like it's never been spoken about so much as it is now. During these times, it's
Yeah.
just fantastic, and I'm really
Mhm.
really pleased. But yeah, so just kind of going back to your life. So you did reference a pivotal moment back in August of 1991 when your life
Yes.
changed forever. Can you share what happened during that time?
Yeah, you bet. So I had moved out of the house about at the age of 18. I just could not take my father's rage. I think that's a fair, accurate statement to go. He had gone from just being mad to rage. It had really elevated. And so I moved out. And um, so as you might imagine, who caught the wrath now? Who caught the wrath when I was no longer there? Well, that would be my mom. And she she already felt quite a bit of wrath from him. I mean, those were the days that commitment meant a different thing in marriage than it does today. A lot of those folks stuck it out, hell or high water. till death do us part. And literally, I mean that literally. Um, but it got to where I just couldn't be around him, even though I had moved out. I couldn't be around him when I did see him again, because again, it the slightest little thing would just set him off. And then I'd be like, yeah, I'm out. Bye, mom. See ya. I'm not putting up with this crap, you know? And that continued to from about 1988 to 91. That really continued to escalate. Um, and he started having an affair. He had gotten a girlfriend, and I had kind of separated myself. I had put wall, this big wall between he and I, just because he was just out of control. And to bring um, more of the story to point of what happened when everything changed, it was August 5th of 1991, and it was a Monday night, and I was scheduled to go over to their house to have the house I grew up in, to have a dinner with them. And after work, it was in the evening time, and so I went over there and had dinner. And actually, surprisingly, it was going great. It was a nice dinner. There was no yelling, there was no manipulation, there was no screaming, there was no enabling. It was just a pleasant dinner. And a couple hours later, I got ready to leave, and I'm walking. I'm walking. I go to the front door, and my mom follows me. And I was 22 years old. I was just a kid. Um, and my mom followed me to the door, and she said, "Turn around, you. Give me a hug." Like any good mom would do. And I hugged her. We embraced, and I held her tight, kissed her on the cheek, and I said, "I love you." And she said, "I love you too." And what I didn't know was that was going to be the very last time I'd ever see her again. And later that night, somewhere around 10 p.m. ish, um, in an absolute fit of rage, uh, my father went into the garage, and he got a steel bar about that long. And while my mom lay sleeping in her bed, he went in and did a number on her. And as you can imagine, everything just changed. I get a phone call at about midnight. I get a phone call from a family member, and they said, "Scott, you've got to get over here to your mom and dad's house, like right now." And I woke up out of a slender sleep, and I'm like, "Okay." And he goes, "Don't go anywhere else. Come straight here." And on that drive over in the middle of the night, I had this gut feeling that something was really, really wrong. And I remember turning onto their street, and they lived on a big long straight stretch, about a half a mile long. And when I turned on that and started driving, I could see it looked like a small city. There were state police, county police, city police, ambulances, paramedics, and it looked like something out of a crime scene on, CSI. And the it it was I can still it's crazy as I sit here and I tell you about this. I can still see it. I can still see it very clear in my head. Um, and of course there were police, and they were questioning, myself. They were questioning other family members that had shown up. And he had injured himself. He had self-inflicted wounds to try and play some kind of BS story, that that somebody broke in and had attacked him, and then had killed my mom. And it only took a couple days, and the cops are like, the law enforcement's like, this story isn't adding up. There's no way, And so, yeah, that was a pretty pivotal moment, in my life. But uh, everything changed, as you could imagine, as the listeners, as you could imagine, everything changed that night, and life took on a completely different course.
No, thank you for sharing that. I mean, so did I guess she passed after the first blow?
Probably so. Yeah, um, it was one of those things. I went into the bedroom a few days later and saw, there's some things that you can't unsee. But the bed sheets and stuff had been pulled away, but there were blood stains and there were blood splatter marks on the wall, and it painted a pretty gruesome. But I suspect you're right. I don't think there was any suffering probably on that. She probably died instantly.
Oh, that's horrible. Oh God, I'm really sorry that you had to go through that. And you were 22 at the time.
Oh yeah, I was just a kid. Yeah, yeah, just a kid. No, not only just a kid, screwed up kid, right? I mean, mom's gone, dad gets hauled off to jail, and then about 3 weeks later, my aunt takes my grandmother, who lived locally, and said, I have to take grandma out of here. All of this she's gonna have a heart attack. She's gonna die. I have to get her away from this." So she took her to a neighboring state where she lived. And so the three closest adults in my life were completely removed in just a matter of a few weeks, and I was left to hold down the fort. And it was just a mess, and law enforcement was still trying to figure out, that first week they were still trying to figure out exactly what happened. So yeah, it was a cluster. Yeah,
I couldn't even imagine going through that. I mean,
yeah,
we watched Monsters that blew off recently on Netflix. I don't know if you watched that as well. But
right.
again, even that's all about parents dying, but it was the sons that killed the parents. It's just absolutely shocking, all these horrific stories, and to have to cope with the grief of a loss. I just feel like for anybody out there as well who has had to go through this episode of grief themselves. I mean, could you share
Right.
your journey through that?
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Well, sometimes at least this has been my experience. And looking back, I can say this. Now, at the time, I couldn't have said this, but it's been my experience that sometimes when life gives us almost like the more than we can handle, more than we can process. Sometimes God carries us through the horriblest of things, and looking back, that was truly me. And there's a lot of evidence to support that. But at the time, you become numb. At least I did, and I self-medicated with drinking. I never got into the hard drug stuff, hard drug scene, but a lot of alcohol consumption, and that was just to numb the pain uh, so I could function. So because I still had to go. I mean, I had a couple weeks off of work. My employer, very generous, back in those days, but I still had to go to work. I still had to have an income coming in to feed myself, to pay my rent, and all those kinds of things. But you get numb, and and you just walk through life numb, and that's kind of what I did for a couple years, anew. And I think the I'm going to step back just one thing because I want to. This was also a pivotal piece, but he finally admitted to the murder. After about a week, he confessed. And in the state that I live in America, if you confess to murder, there is no trial. You go to the front of the line for sentencing. There's no trial. There's no need. You've confessed. It's recorded audio, video. And so he went to jail. And about a month later, my half sister, which would have been his biological sister, because I was adopted. I'm sorry, I should have said that in the beginning. I was adopted. These were not my biological parents, but at birth, that's all I knew. I was adopted at birth. But anyway, his daughter, my sister, I've always called her my sister. Um, she said, I need to go see him. I need to go to jail and see him. I want to look in his eyes and I want him to tell me what happened. And she said, do you want to go? And I said, yeah, I'll go. Again, I'm still numb. I'm still numb at this. It's hard to process. I go to the jail where he's at, and just like you might see on the TVs, you got the big glass, and you got the phone. You can see him, but you're talking through a phone. And I started talking to him, just kind of numb, and he said to me, he was looking right at me. Now you got to remember all the issues my father had. One of them, he was a master manipulator. Master. I mean, he had a military grade level of manipulation. He was that good. And he looked me right in the eyes and knew, and he said, "Do you think I killed your mom?" And I remember going, I don't know what to think. I'm still hoping this is a bad dream. And he looked at me right in the eye and he paused and he said, "Well, I didn't kill her, but I told him I did to cover up for you because I thought you did it." True story. God is my witness. True story. And so that was the other blow that just, if losing your mom to murder is not enough, and then your dad trying to mind twist you, manipulate you. After that, I I kind of I don't it's a little, sometimes some of life is a little bit of a blur. You just go through life to do what you have to do, and you do the bare minimum to get through it. Anybody who's listening to this that has had extreme trauma, you understand what I mean by that. Come to find out about 3 months later, and I had had no further contact with him whatsoever, none, zero. About 3 months later, 4 months later, these three younger girls, all three came forward and said, "Yeah, he physically, sexually abused me years ago." And so now we have, on top of murder, now we have child molestation. And, it went from horrible to even more horrible. And I knew who the girls were. They had been associated and part of the family. So this was just a really horrible situation. But to speed this along, um, I kind of went off the rails for a couple years and just self-medicated. And I remember that some of the turning points that we have in life. There was a gentleman at work, and I was at lunch. I was lunch break, and I was having a bad day. I was having a rough day, and I'm sitting at the table. They had a cafeteria where I worked, and he had gotten his tray, and he come up and sit right next to me, and he goes, "How's it going?" And I said, "It's going all right. It's going fine." And he looked at me and he goes, "You don't look fine." And I didn't say anything. And he said, he goes, "You can't keep going down the road you're going down, right? You understand where that leads." And I just lost it. I mean, I just lost it. I had reached the point where I had to heal, and I hadn't been processing very well. And so that started me in getting into counseling. And at the same time, or about the same time, it also started my path on personal development and personal growth, and starting to understand the power of positivity and the power of our own thoughts, and what we just because thoughts come into our head doesn't mean we have to believe them. And I started down this road with counseling, and I started to learn about myself. I started to learn about my dad. I started to learn about my mom, and I started, almost, if you will, unpacking all of these really toxic things that I had been taught as a young man. And that that's where my journey changed, because I started healing. and I started processing. And it took a little while, but life started to get better after that anew. Do you
Yeah.
want me to keep going?
Yeah, no, I was going to ask because you did actually mention as well about fully forgiving your father. So how was
Yeah,
that actually possible for you? Um,
yeah. It was about 2 to 2.5 years into the counseling session. My counselor, she was a fantastic woman. She was the right one to help me. But anyway, she started talking about this thing about forgiveness, and I was like, yeah, I know all about that, and no, I'm not going to forgive him. And she goes, well, hold on, that's okay, but have you ever thought about this? And have you ever thought about looking at forgiveness like this? And it's easy for us. Ch well,
mhm.
let me back up. Change is not easy for everybody. Change sometimes is very, very difficult for folks, and it's because when we change what we believe, it opens a door to new things that we didn't know about, and sometimes that's scary, you know. And she started talking to me. She said, and I'm paraphrasing, of course, because this was over a course of months and months, but she said, Scott, forgiveness isn't for him. Forgiveness is for you. And I'm like, hmm. And, of course, then I chime in with, well, he's never asked for forgiveness. And she said, okay, but you can still forgive him. And I'm like, how does that work? Wait a minute. How's that? And I started again reading books on forgiveness and started understanding what is forgiveness. And there's a huge, huge misconception in our culture, in our country, in our world about what forgiveness is. And it probably took me probably nine to 12 years before I was able to fully forgive that man. And when I say fully forgive, I can talk about it. I can talk about him. I don't wish him any ill will. Of course, he's passed on. He passed a few years ago, but I didn't wish him any ill will. I wasn't mad at him. I didn't hold any resentment. I didn't hold any anger. And I think oftentimes that people understand or they have a misunderstanding is that, well, if I forgive somebody, I'm letting them off the hook. And that's not true. That is not true. You we forgive to release and remove ourselves from carrying the heavy weight of the anger, of the bitterness, of the resentment. It really has very little to do with the other person. And another thing that people often get misconstrued or mixed up is that, well, if I forgive them, now I have to trust them again. And nothing could be further from the truth. Um, you can forgive somebody and absolutely not trust them. See, trust is something we earn by our actions, right? And by our words and actions matching. But forgiveness is something we choose to give to ourselves. Those are two totally different things.
Yeah.
And I never trusted him again, right? I mean, at this point in my life, when I was working on forgiving, my 2 daughters were very, very little. No way would I have ever put them around him. Never, because I didn't trust him. He wasn't trustworthy. But I can forgive him and let go of the anger, right?
Yeah.
I can
Yeah.
forgive him and let go of the pain.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
And yeah, so you've also identified 6 areas around forgiveness where people often get stuck. Can you expand more on these and how they relate
Yeah.
to you?
Yeah. We'll hit these really quick. Just go over the top of them because boy, there's a whole lesson behind each one of them. But the first one, as I mentioned, is who is forgiveness for? If someone has the belief that, well, if I forgive somebody, it's for them. No, no, it's not. Forgiveness is for us. That's the first one. The second one is that people think that if I forgive somebody, I have to trust them again, or I have to let them back into my circle, right? That's kind of the same thing. No, you don't. No, you don't. Forgiveness does not equal access. Those are two very different things. Another thing that somebody thinks is that, well, if I forgive them, I'm letting them off the hook. I'm accepting and just letting them be okay with the actions that they took. And no, no, that's not what that is. You can forgive somebody and still say that was not okay what they did. And in fact, I'm going to forgive them, but I'm not going to forget, which is another thing that people often, right? I think we've all heard at some point in our life, well, forgiving is forgetting, right? Anybody heard that one? Forgiving is forgetting. BS. No, it's not. No, it's not. How? Look, Anu, there are people that have been through worse things than me, and I fully understand that. Um, but it's not about who went through the most horrible thing.
True. Mm.
How did we how did we heal from it? How did we become, like your podcast? How did we become a victor?
Yeah.
How did we move from becoming the victim to the victor? How did we do that? And I would never, ever, ever expect anybody to forget something so horrible that would have happened to them.
Mhm.
I just it's not possible. You know, somebody cuts us off in traffic, right? We're driving down the road and somebody cuts us off in traffic. I can forget about that 2 hours later. But someone comes in and murders somebody I love, somebody I'm close to, you don't forget that,
Not at
you
all.
know? Those you never leave the memory, you know? So and then I think the other thing is that when we do forgive, we're not changing the past. We can't change the past, but forgiveness will change your future.
Mhm.
And that's the piece that we have to hold on to remember is, wait a minute, I can't go back and undo any of that horrible stuff. But today, starting today and moving into next day, next week, next month, next year, I can change my future. And how is that? Because I have chosen to fully let go of all of that anger and all of that hurt. And I think the last piece to this is that forgiveness is not always a one-time thing, right? As I mentioned just a moment ago, Anu, I said it took me 9 to 12 years. How did I start to forgive him? Well, I was a young man, right? I was in my 20s, and I knew I didn't want that to screw up my life. I knew I didn't want to carry that I didn't want to carry that in the rest of my life. It would have screwed me up. I started to say, you know what? I forgive him. I forgive him. Dad, I forgive you. Now, I didn't tell him this, but I said it out loud to me, right? I forgive you. And when those anger anew, when those anger and those feelings would start to elevate up, I'd be like, nope, nope, no, I forgive him. Nope, nope, I'm not going to feel that. No, I forgive him. I probably had to do that somewhere between 100 to 200 times before I started to feel and hear in my heart, in my gut, in my mind that, yeah, I really, yeah, I do forgive him. I'm not going to let this destroy the rest of my life. So sometimes, there sometimes people say, well, I have forgiven him. I've said it like 10 times, but why don't I feel like I've forgiven him? Forgiveness isn't always a one-time thing. Sometimes it's an ongoing thing. And that's okay. That is really okay. If it takes you 10 years, get started. Get started now. Because if you don't, guess what? And you start 5 years from now, now you're going to take that with you that much longer into your life.
True.
So it, forgiveness is a process,
Yeah.
and it's not always a one-time thing. Sometimes it's an ongoing thing.
Yeah.
And it probably took me 10 or 12 years to where I could truly get to the point where I could look you in the eyes and look anybody in the eyes and just go, yeah, I've forgiven him. I'm cool with it. Um, do I wish my mom was still here? Of course. Of course. Do I have days where I miss her? Oh, hell yes. Yeah, of course. Um, but we have to, you have to at some point make a decision that I'm moving forward with this and I'm not going to be a victim. I'm not going to remain to be a victim, right? Um, I I've got to work through this. And that's the decision piece. You can't forgive somebody if you're trying to think of how to get revenge. Those two things don't they can't stay in the same camp.
Very true.
And
Yeah.
right, and I wanted to. I genuinely wanted to. I wanted to put this behind me. I didn't want it to screw up my life. So in a nutshell, there's the areas where people kind of can and often do get hung up on it, forgiveness.
Interesting. Yeah. So do you feel that in cases like murder and in cases like, abuse or if somebody was attacked, there's so many different cases where which, may require forgiveness. Does it help to try and reason with, why they carried out this awful behavior?
That's a great question. We as, you know, humans try to find some kind of understanding in the trauma, and it helps us to process it. Um, for me, it wasn't a big issue, but I know it is sometimes for other people, and I do think it can help in the process of of how do I how do I get past this and not stay stuck on it. And sometimes trying to find a reason, trying to find an answer to that it is helpful. It was not a hang up for me, but I know it is for other people, and I respect that. In my case with my father, he he knew that if he got a divorce from my mom, he he would be completely starting all over at, in his late 50s. He would be completely starting all over with all of his things and a house and income and retirement. And I think this was his way. He felt like this was my way out, to he and my mom were married for 29 years.
Um,
Yeah, so long time.
mm,
And I think to help process that, to figure out why, I think it helps. My caution to someone is don't get stuck on it. Understand it's one piece of many that you might have to kind of run through that filter and run through your mind, but it's that in itself is not going to help you get all the way through it. But if it is one piece, give yourself time, give yourself grace to understand why. And I think that would help. Yeah.
very true. Yeah, yeah, because they say, hurt people hurt people.
Mm, oh my gosh, that is so true, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But then, those hurt people should have got help and not carried on that pattern by hurting others. So, yeah.
So I think people get you're absolutely right. And I think sometimes I use the word people fall into default mode.
Okay.
And what is default? Well, it's like autopilot.
Mhm.
I'm just going to run on autopilot. And sometimes I don't think people stop to think that, wait a minute, you don't have to do this. Just because that's the kind of life that was demonstrated to you, you can change that. It's not, I mean, it'll take a little work, but
Yeah.
that's not super hard to do.
Nice.
Um, but you can change that. You can break the cycle. I was a cycle breaker.
Yes.
And you anybody who's watching this, you can be a cycle breaker, but it's not going to happen overnight. Because the programming in your head was not done overnight. It was done over years,
Yeah.
and it's gonna take a little time. But you got to start.
Yeah.
You have to start. Just take one step. You don't have to start off in a sprint,
Yeah.
but take a step to undo that, and you can break the cycle.
You can, yeah. So what would be your kind of piece of advice for them to start this process of forgiveness right now?
Yeah. I think the very first thing is this. I think you need to get real serious with yourself, not with your spouse, not with your parents, not who you're mad at. And you need to ask yourself, do I really want to forgive this person? And you don't have to ask that for me. You need to ask it for you. Do you really want to forgive this person? And if you can't at least say, okay, I'm gonna try. I'm gonna take the steps. I don't want to hold on to this. I may not know how. I may not have all the answers, but I'm gonna start. I think that's how everybody starts. You at least have to say, I'm gonna try. But if you're stuck in, I don't want to forgive them. They don't deserve it. They don't deserve to be forgiven. I'm sorry, friends. That is the wrong attitude. That is the wrong mindset.
True.
If you're thinking of oh, I'm going to get my revenge. I'm going to get even, I'll get my money back. I'll show them. They're going to be sorry they crossed me. If you have that mindset, it's going to be nearly impossible to reach a point of forgiveness. So you have to want to. You really do. At some level, you have to want to.
Wow, very interesting. Thank you so much. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's amazing. Thank you for these amazing insights that you're sharing and such an emotional story. Wow. It's just, yeah, having to go through a loss of a parent, as I said, there's a lot out there now. I feel there's so much coming up, in visuals like in the cinema and on TV about abuse survivors and so many stories that I just feel like it is really helping to bring these topics to light, that
Yeah.
about healing and how we can all heal. We don't need to remain in the past. We can move on and we can forgive. Maybe
Yeah.
not forget,
Yeah.
but forgive
Right.
to heal.
Absolutely. 100%. Amen. Yes. It seems like your generation, my generation, it does seem like, we were raised in families that didn't have it all together. There were all kinds of challenges and dysfunctions and things like that. But it does seem like there's much more awareness today of how to process and heal from some of those things today than there ever was, 30, 40 years ago.
Mhm. Very true. Yeah.
Yeah.
Amazing. So how can my listeners find you?
Yeah. So I'm on Facebook, and I have two different accounts. I have a professional page, it's my speaking page, and then I have a personal page. If you go ahead and follow my professional page, if you send me a friend request and I don't know you, don't don't take it personal. I'm not going to accept. Because I've had people try to steal pictures and send viruses, and I just but follow my professional page. You'll be able to see me there. That's Scott Stewart, author, speaker, encourager, and then you can find me on LinkedIn as well. I spend some time on LinkedIn posting a lot of things from words of encouragement, from things of forgiveness, how to become a better listener. Sometimes even podcast interviews like this, I'll put little clips, on LinkedIn. But feel free to follow me, engage. I would love if I can help you, if I can be a support, if I can give you a word of encouragement. I'm happy to do that because I understand the power of forgiving and how it can really set people free. I'm obviously testimony to that. And if I can help you in some way to find that freedom, it'd be an honor to help you do that. Yeah.
Amazing. Yeah, I can see just how passionate you are about your work as well. And I can really see you on the stage being a real impactful speaker as well.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that. It's like I said a few minutes ago, there's people that have been through far worse things than me. Um, and I acknowledge that. Um, and again, but it's not about who's got the most
Spotlight.
devastating story. That
Mm.
that's not what this is about. This is about taking the tools, taking the ideas, taking the mindset, taking the philosophies that will help you um, recover from it, right? I heard a coach online the other day. This is so true. He said, "What happened to us, we had no control over.
Yeah,
But now that it happened to us, we are responsible with what we do with it. That is 100% our responsibility
true.
with what we do with it. It's not yours. It's not mine. It's not our neighbors. It's not our spouse. It's
Yeah.
now 100% our responsibility. And once you understand that, and you say, okay, this sucks. This is BS, but now I have to deal with it. It kind of gives you permission to move forward, you know? And I know it's not fair. I get it. I understand. Um, but you still have a responsibility to respond. How you respond to it is your responsibility. So,
Absolutely. Yeah. Oh, wow. Yeah, no, that's fantastic. And so what would be your one piece of advice you'd like to share before we close?
yeah, I have a quote that I heard many years ago, and it's as old as the hills, but it's right. The apple doesn't fall far from the tree, right? And what is the reference point to that? Well, the reference point is that, well, Johnny grew up to be just like his dad. Or Sally, oh yeah, she is just like her mom, the way her mannerisms and stuff like that.
Oh boy.
Um, and yeah, and I say, okay, so the apple doesn't fall far from the tree, but did you know you can pick your apple up and move it?
Yeah.
And that's what I did. I'm not anything like my father. My father taught me, of all the things he taught me, and he taught me a lot of valuable things, how to work on cars, how to build a house, I
Okay.
mean, there's a lot of good things, but the thing that he taught me the most was the kind of man I didn't want to be. And you can move your apple. You're not stuck. You're not forced to stay where you are. You can move your apple and put yourself in a better situation, and you can heal from whatever's happened to you. That's my leaving parting piece of advice, Anu.
I love that. I was actually visualizing the apple then as well.
Yeah, right?
It's
Yeah.
true.
If you don't like where it landed, pick it up and move it. Come on, man.
I
You
know.
know?
Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely. We have the freedom to dictate how we want our life to be. Nobody else has that
absolutely.
power. So yeah.
Yes. Absolutely. Absolutely.
Beautiful. Thank you so much for your inspiration today, Scott. It's been an absolute honor having you on.
Yeah.
And listeners, please do connect with Scott. I'll be dropping all his links in this podcast episode. And please do get in touch with Scott or myself if you have any
Thank you.
questions about this episode. I'm sure Scott would be honored to hear from you.
Yeah.
Thank you again, my friends. And that's all we have time for. And I shall see you in the next show.